Thank you, Bernadette. So just a very brief introduction from me. I'm Michael Lecanto. I'm the president of the board for the Boston LERA Chapter. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar on access and opportunity in labor relations. I'm not going to be doing much of anything other than this brief introduction because we have two stellar co-facilitators today who are going to be helping us out. I'm going to hand it off in a moment to Lisa Field, who is another member of our executive committee in the chapter. Lisa is an organizer with the Massachusetts Nurses Association, and she's also president of the board of the Labor Guild in Boston. So we're happy to have Lisa with us today. And we will also be joined by arbitrator Alvin Wilson out of Connecticut. Arbitrator Wilson will be facilitating the question and answer period at the conclusion of the presentations. So as I mentioned, we have a packed agenda and we have a lot to get through. So I will hand it off to Lisa, and thank you once again for everyone attending today.
Thank you very much, Mike. Again, welcome everyone. And just a housekeeping, if you have any questions as we go through this packed agenda, please feel free to put those questions right in the chat, and we'll do the question and answer at the end of the presentations. So again, welcome everyone. We want to give a special thanks to Executive Committee member Mike Pickernall from the Massachusetts Teachers Association for suggesting this topic. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. Their full bios can be found under this event on our website. So the first two that will be up will be arbitrators Mary Ellen Shea and Susan Halperin from the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee of the New England region of the National Academy of Arbitrators, who will discuss findings from the DEIB Committee Survey of Practitioners on Implicit Bias in the Practice. Mary Ellen Shea is the co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging DEIB Committee of the National Academy of Arbitrators New England region. Ms. Shea is in private practice as an arbitrator, mediator, facilitator, and trainer. She has been committed to improving access to dispute resolution services that better service labor management advocates and their clients, and has focused her work on raising awareness and about broadening diversity in the field. She has served as adjunct faculty at the University of Rhode Island, Antioch College, and as a visiting instructor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Susan Halperin has been a labor arbitrator and mediator for over 43 years. Among Susan's many accomplishments was her appointment in 1980 by the governor of Connecticut to the first panel of binding interest arbitrations for the teacher board negotiations. She was the only woman on this panel. She also joined AAA and FMCS as a labor panel member. As her arbitration and mediation practice was growing, Susan lobbied at the Connecticut General Assembly and was counsel for the Connecticut Association of Private Nonprofit Child Caring Agencies and the Association of Substance Abuse Agencies. So welcome to both, and I'll pass it on to Mary Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a prepared statement because I'm not good at winging it. So excuse me while I switch my screen to a Word document and share this with you. According to a 2020 National Academy of Arbitrators report, about 20% of Academy arbitrators are women, and fewer than 5% are from underrepresented groups. This is a startling statistic. Over 2 years ago, a group of arbitrators formed a Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee as part of the New England chapter of the Academy. We committed to two broad goals. One goal is to address bias, racism, or discrimination in ourselves and in the practice of labor arbitration. The other goal is to address the structural barriers that people from underrepresented groups encounter when they want to become a labor arbitrator. We see this as our work because we make up the current cadre of labor arbitrators, and we are in a position to address the fact of bias in our profession. To meet these two broad goals, the DEIB committee formed two subcommittees. The education subcommittee was formed to raise arbitrator awareness of and approaches to addressing bias in our practice. The Bridge Subcommittee is working to create a bridge or a pathway for those from underrepresented groups who want to become a labor arbitrator. During this 2-year period, members of the DEIB committee conducted extensive research, and we educated ourselves in order to raise our own awareness about the pervasive nature of learned bias in our profession. In addition, part of our research included a survey of labor and management advocates asking about their experience of or their observations of bias in labor arbitration, whether that bias showed up in the process, in an arbitrator themselves, or in an arbitration decision. We are grateful to the New England LERA chapters, and particularly to the Boston LERA chapter, for assisting in getting that survey out to so many LERA members. If you completed one of those surveys, thank you. The results of that survey confirmed that a number of labor and management advocates, in fact, had observed or experienced bias in the arbitration process, by an arbitrator, or in the arbitration decision. We have also developed a comprehensive and challenging 5-part education program for Academy arbitrators. The first program was just launched this March here in New England and will be completed by the end of May. 20 established arbitrators have committed to completing this program. The first 2 sessions of this 5-part program provide a foundation for the learning conversations and self-reflection that follow. For example, one session is an extensive video compilation of interviews with labor and management advocates from around New England who candidly describe their experiences or observations of bias in the arbitration process by an arbitrator or in an arbitration decision. Another session features another extensive video compilation, this time of interviews we conducted with labor arbitrators from around the country who themselves are from underrepresented groups and who describe their experiences of bias, insensitive comments, insensitive treatment, and as well as the visible and invisible obstacles they encountered when trying to develop their own practice. At the conclusion of the education program, the participating arbitrators will receive a certificate of completion from the New England chapter of the Academy. It is our hope that Academy arbitrators will commit to completing an updated bias training every year, and that this educational program will be utilized by other regions of the National Academy. Turning to the Bridge Subcommittee, this addresses our outreach effort to find, attract, sponsor, mentor, and support people from underrepresented groups who want to become labor arbitrators. At this time, the New England chapter offers mentorship and training to experienced professionals who have recently shifted from an advocacy role to the role of arbitrator. The Bridge Subcommittee is developing additional options to provide information and education about becoming a labor arbitrator to people from underrepresented groups who are looking for a more introductory program. We invite any of you who would like to pursue a profession in labor arbitration or think you might be interested to contact the New England chapter of the National Academy of Arbitrators. And now I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Susan Halperin. Susan?
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet with you. Mary Ellen has given you some of the details about the work of the committee. I would like to say more about our commitment to the work. First of all, we realize that we have an ethical responsibility as arbitrators to educate ourselves and others that come before us and those who will succeed us. It's part of our professional ethics. Mm-hmm. Arbitrators and advocates are all involved in an agreed upon process for the ultimate peaceful resolution of workplace disputes, whether it's grievance or interest arbitration. We need to serve the process without prejudices to the best of our ability. We have heard from both labor and management representatives that our efforts in this regard are very important in order to ensure workplace justice. The work we are doing is complex, and we found there is no ready-made template for how to approach our collective need for education in this area. Arbitrators come from all kinds of backgrounds and experiences, as do the clients that we serve. In pursuit of our goals, we met bi-weekly to discuss at length shared videos and materials suggested by the committee members. The more we met and shared our observations regarding the shared materials, the more the group began to trust each other as people. That trust led us to disclose to each other those experiences or lack of experiences that we each faced growing up that has affected us as adults and professionals. Each committee member took one or more of the Harvard bias tests. We urge you, each one of you, to do the same. Each one of us was somewhat wary of the tests and then surprised by the fact that each of us had unconscious or learned biases based on our particular life experiences. Those biases were disclosed and discussed at length during these bi-weekly meetings. They are the basis of the 5-part curriculum that we are providing for education with regard to bias. Retaking the tests or knowing the answers did not change those outcomes. We're dismayed and recognized that we needed to move forward and do more work. We viewed and discussed presentations such as Seeing White, videos which expanded our sense of racial bias and where it comes from. We have lenses that we use to look at the world and at each other. We understand that watching cartoons, targeted advertising, musical lyrics, and much more have had an effect on who we are as people and how we judge the issues before us. On a really positive note, when we reviewed the advocate survey responses as well as the advocate videos, we found that advocates in general expressed the fact that they appreciated the current cadre of arbitrators, although they indicated that we may be aging. They believed that we individually identified bias, that if we individually identified biases in our practices because of our experiences, that we would make every effort to identify our problems and seek to address it. We want to thank you all for that respect for us and for the profession. We would like to acknowledge the support of the National Academy Research and Education Foundation for its grants that allowed us to hire Steph Nelson, a soon-to-be URI Schmidt Labor Center graduate, who worked with the subcommittee to facilitate both the DEIB aspects and the audio and visual aspects of the program. Now we are able to share the program with other arbitrators. Would you please help us? It may be that you are interested or you are in a position to identify other individuals who you believe would be suitable for the profession. Please suggest them to us or reach out to us with their names. We are available and willing to mentor others for the profession. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll cover them during the question and answer period at the end. Next up, we have Arbitrator and Professor E. Patrick McDermott of Salisbury University, who will discuss his recent research with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission that indicates the efficacy of online video mediation and promoting a safe space for parties to a mediation in discrimination disputes. E. Patrick McDermott is a labor arbitrator and chair of the Department of Management at the Franklin P. Purdue School of Business at Salisbury University in Maryland. He is, among many accomplishments, he is a two-time Fulbright Scholar in law, teaching and researching in 2007, 2008 in Shanghai, China, and in 2018 and 2019 in Bucharest, Romania. His research focuses on workplace dispute resolution. He recently worked with the EEOC on a national survey of mediator and participant opinions on the use of online video mediation. Thank you, and I turn it over to Patrick.
Greetings, everybody can see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Good, good. It's a pleasure to join the LERA Boston. My grandmother would be proud today as a Dorchester girl back in the day from Boston, though she found better location in Baltimore. But she was always proud of her upbringing, and we always tried to help her with her pronunciations. So it's great to be here. I'd like to thank Alan Simonetz on the call. And in China, they say, if you teach me for a day, you're a father for life. And he was my teacher for the BALA program. So I want to thank Alan for that. And Steve Ignowski, who's from the EEOC headquarters, who designed the EEOC's program over the last few decades. He's on the call in case you have any questions. I'll try to go quickly here and try to relate my research with some of the other areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, including the individuals who are raising these disputes, because these really are the most important persons. And in fact, the reason we seek diversity in the profession is so that these individuals can see persons who look like them and feel as though that they're getting justice in our society. So we did a study, two studies recently on online video mediation at the EEOC. Going back to 2000, my research team first evaluated the in-person mediation program. So we have incredible data over 20 years on all aspects of the program performance. And EEOC continued to use a shorter version of my survey every year. So we've got really good data where you can benchmark how the in-person mediation program performed vis-a-vis the online video mediation. As opposed to a lot of surveys that are done and you hear feedback, this is a survey, I'm a PhD, so this is a survey with a rigorous methodology. It's peer-reviewed research. So there's requirements in terms of how you gather the data, response rates, et cetera. So the EEOC cooperated with us, and for the period during the COVID era, every mediation, the parties were then asked to fill out an online survey where they discussed all kinds of questions on procedural distributive justice. These two reports, each of them was about 145 pages. One is on the participants' feedback on the range, and I'll talk about some of the key measures. But again, I can't cover two 140-some page reports with immense data, but you can find it on the EEOC website. Now, the National Academy and other groups have said, you know, we went early to the online and trained arbitrators, and they did a great job. But it was the EEOC that really rushed to the ramparts right away, where they quick switched into the online mode. And of course, they had a lot of bumps along the way, but because of the nature of their mission and also their ability to say to all the parties, we're going online, they were able to do it more quickly. Now, that said, please, this is not an digital divide research, because anybody who surveyed essentially had already crossed the digital divide by being able to participate in the process. So for those of you who have digital divide issues, et cetera, that's another day for another study. So what did we find? Well, we know that the EEOC mediation's really the last stop for voice and a positive outcome. Before I can transition to labor arbitrator, I represented plaintiffs' employment litigation in addition to teaching. And the odds of prevailing in an EEOC investigation are slim to none. The statistics are there. On top of that, you get your right to sue letter. If somebody's lucky enough to find an attorney, then they go to court, and the legal empiricists have showed that the judges talking about implicit bias, the judges in the system really are not amenable to employment discrimination claims. So it's a personal belief, not a research belief, that my experience is that your best shot for your client is in a third-party dispute resolution process at some point. And for people that really don't have a lot of resources, it's at the EEOC if afforded the opportunity. So what did we find out about online video mediation? Procedural justice measures, 86% of charging party, 94% said the procedures were fair. Distributive justice outcome measures, 82 and 91% saw the mediation is fair. Well, did you get what you wanted, which is a key question? Obviously, mediations facilitated negotiation. You'd kind of expect people would walk away on each side thinking they didn't get what they wanted. They got something. And we can see 60% of the charging parties, 72% of the employers satisfied with the results. It's a higher outcome satisfaction rate than the 2000 measure. But again, people shouldn't necessarily be satisfied with what they get in a negotiated outcome. 92% of charging parties, 98% of employers would use online video mediation again. Think about that, right? 62% of employers stated the availability of online video mediation makes it more attractive to participate. I did a study for the EEOC in 2003 on why employers decline to mediate, the declination study, we call it. And the reason is they said we don't want to waste the time. We don't think we did anything wrong. By going to the online forum, you're creating greater access for employers to stay in the game. The idea being if you get them in the room, then there's an opportunity to work out a resolution for the charging party. And again, we know the power distance between the parties and the role of the mediator. This is an opportunity. More employers are willing to participate, which is important. 70% of the participants prefer online video mediation, also called online dispute resolution. So the parties want to stay online. When I started this research, this was kind of debatable. People were talking about Zoom fatigue and other aspects of online video mediation. And I thought from my practice that this would be successful. And this data kind of confirms it. It's a massive database. There's no other similar database with a high response rate that covers one process in this kind of detail. We also had open-ended questions that explain why. Now, some people did say, well, come on, man, it's still COVID. I'm not going to go down in person. But most people talked about other reasons, the flexibility, the convenience, and this gets to access to justice. Why more access to justice? Greater willingness to participate from all parties, but getting employers in the room, less stress to many parties, which gets into power distance and intimidation. We'll talk about that. Flexibility for schedules. For a working person, when they lose their job and then they got to get another job, but they're still fighting for their dignity. Most of the clients I represented over the years, it was a dignity issue. Money was secondary to dignity. They wanted to speak and be heard and fight the discrimination they saw. This provides them the opportunity to do that while continuing to take care of their kids, other obligations, which often people have, and particularly single mothers. So this flexibility also helped with resolution because mediators could pop back real quick to do a deal. And there was really not a problem. We measured the digital divide once they're in terms of technological problems. For those old enough to remember antennas, and you'd hold the antenna, put some tin foil on it, we found to a large degree mediation was like the old days with antennas. Initially, the program be sketchy. You had to do the horizontal, the vertical, hold the fingers up to the antenna. Once the show, you got the show, it was a great show. You forgot about the first 2 minutes of the inconvenience of tuning into the show. Some people were afraid to be in the same room. In fact, I always say I was surprised, and why, I don't know, as a plaintiff's advocate, that I got a lot of feedback. People said, I don't want to be in the same building. I don't want to be in the same room. Obviously, persons with a disability, it made it more accessible for them. And again, the affording the cost, the time, and the attendance, the power balancing. And there's some interesting things. And Homer LaRue tuned me into this, and I missed this. We were talking about arbitrators and the rate corollary initiative. If you think about it, we may have persons of color who may be more arbitrators, mediators in a certain part of the country. other cultures or persons with unique characteristics, other parts of the country. This gives you a chance with the online process to balance out diversity. So for example, if you're underrepresented in Western states or whatever it may be, it really gives a possibility to move these third-party neutrals around so that there's not even an imbalance in successful diversity projects. If in fact we can succeed, let's say in New England, well, there's still the rest of the United States. So there's some real potential. And the other thing is for mediators and arbitrators, and this is vocational impact, and it's a diversity issue, but it's an age diversity issue. I ran an old classmate who arbitrates in Canada now. She indicated that the online process makes it a lot easier for her. She doesn't have to travel as much, thinks that'll extend her career. Well, how will that impact the profession? So last but not least, and Steve Ignowski's on the call, and I say to Steve, well, you got 72% settlement rate in person, online. It's about the same settlement rate. What about a 72 to 85 study? How do you get to 85%? Could you tier the mediation so you got a super mediator on call that can come in at a certain point and maybe close the tough cases? Is that possible using these new tools? Of course, we've got the cost savings. The agency saves a lot of money in scheduling and rooms. The productivity increases because when a mediation cancels out, instead of losing the case for the day, you can switch to another case. And of course, EEOC productivity rises equals access to justice. More cases get mediated. They reach further back into their backlog and offer mediation to more parties because it's not a guarantee. And the mediators report a quality of work life. The mediators say it's much better because we surveyed them separately. They triangulate my other data. They've made all the same observations the participants have reported, but they're doing it from the mediator side. This was a separate survey. Probably most interesting was the quality of life. And here's just some comments. And I leave it at that. I spoke fast. Hopefully I stayed within my time limits. And thank you very much for the honor.
Thank you so much. Terrific. So next we have Arbitrator Alan Simonet, who will discuss the efforts of the Ray Corollary Initiative, RCI, to increase diversity in arbitrator selection and related practical developments. Alan Simonet has been a full-time labor and employment arbitrator since 1988. He is also the president and owner of Simonet ADR Services Incorporated, located in Media, Pennsylvania. He has conducted numerous grievance and interest arbitrations in public, private, and federal sectors throughout the country. He has experience in issues involving airlines, utilities, education, including higher education, sports, law enforcement, education, healthcare, port operations, and firefighting. A member of the National Academy of Arbitrators since 1995, he currently serves on the labor panels of the American Arbitration Association, Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, National Mediation Board, the Pennsylvania Bureau of Mediation, and the Public Employment Relations Board for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you now.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me. First, before I get started, I want to thank especially Mary Ellen and Susan for their excellent and comprehensive presentation. It's as a former president of the REF, it really makes me happy to see that our funds are used for such purposes. So what I have been asked to do and what I'm going to do in the short time that I have is to present a historical perspective and also a macro view of the Ray Corollary Initiative, including its history, and also the efforts to implement the Ray Corollary Initiative and its adoption by the NAA and the DEIB, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee. I will also talk about activities by the RCI in diversifying arbitration panels. And finally, I'm going to touch upon, because it's still kind of an active effort, regarding the collaboration between the NAA and the Cornell ILR School and the Scheiman Institute in creating a consortium for what they have called the next generation of neutrals. So let's start first by giving you a little history for those who may not know it, of the establishment of the Ray Corollary Initiative. This initiative basically arose in November of 2019 out of a presentation by Homer LaRue and I at the 13th Annual Labor and Employment Law Conference. I'm just going to give you the description of what our presentation was about. It was that parties select arbitrators based upon a reputation for acceptability and fairness. However, parties have criticized the makeup of these panels, arbitration panels, as being too white, too male, and too old. Yet those same parties select who they know to hear and resolve the disputes presented. So the recruitment and advancement of women and persons of color to serve as arbitrators and mediators presents a vexing problem in the labor and employment ADR community. We were tasked with discussing the challenges and opportunities in developing more and diverse rosters of arbitrators. As you see, we're still discussing that today. The presentation and subsequent paper presented the issues in two areas. First, the first issue concerned the recruitment of arbitrators. And the second area was in the bias in their selection once these arbitrators become qualified to do cases. As part of that paper, we recited the statistics going back up until 1995, showing the lack of diversity in the profession. But I think to really get a good appreciation of those challenges, I'm going to share with you the statistics shared by Harry Katz of Cornell ILR School in a paper delivered at the NAA meeting just last week. It's interesting that these statistics are similar to those offered today by Mary Ellen and Susan. Basically, as far as the membership of the NAA, the female membership has grown from up to about 21%, up from 12% in 1999. However, Black members only constitute 3% of the NAA membership, and Hispanic members only 2% of that membership. That is the same percentage at the last time the Cornell ILR School produced a paper in 2019. The paper then described the hurdles facing individuals who are seeking to join the profession. Now, one of the major areas of one of the major hurdles described, included the issues of arbitrators establishing neutrality while also continuing to make an income while trying to establish this practice. The second problem concerned what we're talking about a lot today, and that is the institutional bias regarding the reluctance of parties to select or try new arbitrators. In other words, we call that I select who I know. And it's based on many biases, but also a certain amount of risk aversion in which parties basically say, look, we're kind of afraid to try new arbitrators on quote unquote less important cases because really all cases are important. So what we proposed in that paper was the Ray Corollary Initiative. And basically it was the application of empirical data that encourage parties in the creation of panels that if a panel or group eligible for selection, if that group is at least 30% of people with what I call rising identities, that's based on gender, color, LGBTQ plus status, or otherwise underrepresented purposes, there are higher odds that one of those individuals will be selected. Our paper was eventually published in the Howard Law Journal in the winter of 2020. Since then, the NAA has been engaged in encouraging diversity in the profession as well as its own membership. In addition to the support of the RCI, the NAA has created the DEIB committee to seek ways to encourage diversity, equity, inclusion, and I underline this, belonging within the membership here. But also the DEIB committee is committed to encouraging the profession to encourage diversity in recruiting new arbitrators and encouraging the parties to seek more inclusion in their panels. So in addition, we have engaged in substantial outreach, which has resulted in the establishment of several salons nationwide, one of which, of course, is recognized here in New England. The RCI as an entity was subsequently incorporated as a nonprofit, and one of its tasks was to solicit pledges from a number of agency panels as well as parties to incorporate the goal of creating panels that represent 30% of people who are otherwise unrepresented in the profession. Some of those agency panels that have adopted the RCI include the AAA, JAMS, and the Institute of Conflict Prevention and Resolution, or CPR, all as part of their diversity commitment. On the collective bargaining front, a majority of the Amtrak unions have agreed to include the RCI in their agreements. And the National Board of the National Rural Letter Carriers have also adopted the pledge by a unanimous vote. The RCI or something like that has shown up in other collective bargaining agreements. One agreement of note is one in which I served as the interest arbitrator between the City of Philadelphia and the Fraternal Order of Police. This experience kind of showed the interest of the parties, especially in the area of police accountability during the time of COVID, in creating a system of arbitration that is not only protects the rights of police officers, but also is accountable to the city and its citizens. So as part of that agreement, the City of Philadelphia and the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 5 agreed as a supplement to their agreement to create a panel, rotating panel, to permanently address police officers in termination arbitrations. And as part of that permanent panel, the parties agreed to have 40% of that panel contain underrepresented arbitrators. So recently, the National Academy and the Cornell ILR School and the Scheiman Institute held a conference that was dedicated to, and I quote here, preparing an inclusive next generation of workplace neutrals. It's dedicated to finding, recruiting, and establishing the next generation of workplace neutrals to address first the lack of diversity, and also address the increasing retirements of current arbitrators. The conference included representatives from a number of the agencies that select arbitrators, as well as advocates and users of workplace neutrals. Part of that discussion included the proposal of a consortium to help recruit, train, and arrange to have new opportunities for new neutrals to get basic cases. I'm not going to expand too much on that consortium because it's still very much in the discussion. The presentation was only approximately 3 weeks ago, and the parties have gone back and are engaged in active discussion concerning the implementation of the consortium. Finally, after hearing the presentations and the The resources that have been cited with respect to anti-bias trainings, there is one particular one I do want to encourage everyone to consider. The ABA Labor and Employment section has adopted a challenge, and it's called the 21-Day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge. It contains a number of readings addressing issues of equity and bias. And many of us who are engaged with the section have taken it and found it to be very enlightening. I will put the link to the challenge in the chat so anyone can use it, can take the challenge on their own. Again, thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. And now we have Ellen Gallen-Procida and Katrina Nobles of the Shea Institute on Conflict Resolution at the Cornell University ILR School. They will discuss the Institute's Labor Arbitrator Development Program and its focus on developing a new generation of qualified arbitrators who reflect the diversity of today's workforce. So Ellen Gallen-Procida is the Director of Labor Management Relations Programs at the Shea Institute on Conflict Resolution at Cornell University. She's the co-chair of Scheinman's Institute Employment and Labor ADR Hub. She has 30 years of arbitration advocacy experience, including supervision of more than 2,000 arbitrations. In addition, she has been teaching arbitration advocacy for over 25 years. And Katrina Nobles is the Director of Conflict Programs for the Shea Institute on Conflict Resolution as well, designing curriculum, teaching on-campus credit-bearing courses, instructing professional and customized programs, and facilitating discussions for organizational workplace conflicts. On campus, Nobles leads the campus mediation program, which includes a partnership with the Office of the Judicial Administrator to mediate minor code of conduct violations by students. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And it is a pleasure to be here and to discuss our labor arbitrator development program with you. As Arbitrator Simonette has mentioned, the Shea Institute is very involved in this process. And when it was developed, its whole purpose was to help train the next generation of neutrals and practitioners. And what Katrina and I are here to talk about today is the third cohort of our labor arbitrator development program. And as a labor arbitrator and mediator myself, it's extremely exciting to me to be part of this great effort. And the other efforts that have been implemented through the years have only worked so much. And so our focus, as is the focus of everything else we've discussed today, is to make great strides in making our profession reflect the people who come before us. The Labor Arbitrator Development Program is an intensive 18-month program with real and practical training. It is sponsored by the Shea Institute. We have actually extended the application deadline to June 15th to make sure anybody on this program has time to apply, or people you share it with. We've had requests for that. There are scholarships available to reduce the course. And I'm going to turn it over to Katrina for some details about the topic, and then I'll come back and share some more with you. Katrina.
Thanks, Ellen. So first of all, I'll just put the link into the chat so that people are aware of where the both the description of the Labor Arbitrator Development Program is, as well as the application link. And so you can find that there, but I'm going to share my screen in just a minute to kind of talk a little bit about the topic descriptions, because one of the major sort of advances that we're seeing with this particular cohort, as Ellen mentioned, this is the third cohort in sort of a series of doing this over a number of years. One of the big advances was actually working with multiple neutrals in the field, as well as academics that are doing research on this. Alan, Arbitrator Simonette mentioned Harry Katz and his research. We've also done quite a bit of research with the FMCS. and have been looking for trends and shifts across the field and what's needed. And so we have reworked sort of our topics and our material to reflect both what is traditionally foundational in the field of labor arbitration, but is also kind of noticed and mostly anecdotally, I'll say, across the field, which is there's a number of barriers to actually getting into the field and a bit of confusion around the path into getting into the field. And so we've tried to make sure that our topics address those things, as well as bring topics like unconscious and implicit bias into the training itself, so that we are working with a next generation of neutrals that are aware of bias, are aware of sort of the diversity, and work towards inclusion in the field. So let me share my screen for just a moment to kind of show the topics that we're going to be focusing on. So I'll say a couple of the major topic areas that we have added. We have, as I mentioned, the more foundational topics, such as ethics, just cause, analysis, and use of past practice and decision making. Those are kind of our more foundational sort of topic areas. What we've added is information on virtual hearings and how to run those both ethically as well as clearly and smoothly. We have added more information in building your network and professional reputation to explore kind of how you do that from potentially non-traditional paths into the field, or just as, you know, a different lens to kind of look at how you are creating a network so you're known. So things like being on a panel will get you to the point of being acceptable to the parties and getting chosen. We've also added quite a bit in the nuts and bolts of building a conflict resolution practice around alternative paths and how to establish yourself in different ways. And then also with decision-making and implicit bias in particular, to incorporate the idea that obviously, even though our profession is called neutral, right? None of us is truly neutral walking into a room, because we come in with experiences and lenses that we look through, and part of our job as a neutral is to be able to manage those lenses and understand those lenses. The second thing that I'll say, along with the sort of bolstering of material, we're also looking at very specific barriers, such as financial barriers. We're looking at the barriers in terms of education and pathways, what's expected by parties, what's acceptable to parties. And as Arbitrator Simonet mentioned at our conference a couple of weeks ago, we were specifically talking about the next generation of neutrals and how to support that next generation, not just among academics and well-established neutrals, but also with the parties, labor and management in the room, also with the case administration agencies that are creating rosters and panels. And so that was a very fruitful discussion in terms of thinking through those barriers to acceptability and barriers to being chosen as an arbitrator on a case. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ellen to talk a little bit more about networking and some mock arbitration material we've come up with.
So in addition to everything Katrina said, and just to add to it, there will be virtual components and in-person components to this training over the time period. Some of the work that she went and scrolled through will be done virtually. There will be 5 days in New York in October, and then in the spring, a few days in Washington, and then more in person the following October. One of the things that we believe can be very, very effective and that we've worked on is that the participants in the program, this next generation of neutrals, will sit in on a mock case that the parties will put on. They'll have turns being in charge of the hearing, and then they will write a decision that the parties will get to see. So newer arbitrators will have this opportunity to do this mock arbitration and have the parties see their writing. The other key, as many have said, is the mentoring process and is the education that comes along with it. Arbitrator Simonet, we are lucky enough to have as one of our instructors and one of the arbitrators who will be helping in this process. So it is a program that will hopefully address many of the barriers that newer arbitrators do face, and that coaching and that experience is extremely important. Katrina, did you want to talk a little bit about the barriers program in the hub before we use up our time?
Yes. So the one thing that I'll say is that I really appreciated all the presentations of today, because it really highlighted a number of different programs and supports that are out there. And so one of the things that we're trying to also support with the Labor Arbitrator Development Program is basically not reinventing the wheel. So tapping into some of those already existing programs, tapping into mentors and networks across the field that all of you have mentioned. And then also bringing in sort of a diverse lens of people. And that's what we're going to be doing on June 5th at a webinar from 12 to 1:30, where we'll have a group of several different arbitrators and mediators talking about different paths into the field. So we hear a lot about, folks coming in from a legal background. We also have folks on that panel that are going to talk about coming in from an academic background, from an advocacy background, from an ombuds background, so that there's a lot of different paths that people don't think of as the quote unquote traditional path into the field. And that'll be done through our hub for the Scheinman Institute. And if you would like to sign up for that hub, I'll put that link in the chat as well. And what you'll need to do is scroll down. That's the About page of the Scheinman Institute. And if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, there is a form that says Stay Connected, Join the Employment Labor ADR Hub. And that's where we run our webinars and things through. And with that, we should probably end so that there's time for some Q&A.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alvin, who's going to facilitate the Q&A.
Yes, hi. I actually have a question for Mary Ellen and Susan. You can decide who needs to take it. So your interviews indicated that advocates have some concerns that relates the hearing process. I'm sorry, the concerns regarding the hearing process as it relates to the use of racist or sexist or other discriminatory language that is expressed because it is part of an issue before the arbitrator. Did you discuss this concern during your educational program?
Susan, you want to take that? I think that part of that question is, how do we handle hearings where a witness or an advocate is using racialized language? We have experience of that happening as part of testimony or evidence, but we also have experience of it just happening. Do you want to address that, Susan? And we have talked about it, so. It actually is an ongoing, Susan, you're muted. It is an ongoing topic of discussion in the New England chapter's weekly drop-in. It doesn't come up every week, but it is something that New England arbitrators have heightened sensitivity about. Susan?
Yeah, thank you, Mary Ellen. The way it's come up is in the discussions about the issues that come before us that may have racial or other implications. And we find that in order to deal with it, that the arbitrator have to look at the advocates as well to see how we can involve them in determining what kind of language should be used in the hearing, as well as what language should carry through to decisions. I don't think that we have decided that there's one way to deal with it, but the thing we do know is that none of us should allow it to continue and to interrupt what's going on in the hearing. So to the extent that we are sensitive to these things, the first thing we probably should do as an arbitrator is to talk to the advocates about the use of the language or continuation of the use during the hearing. Depending upon what that allows. Of course, if it's the grievance that's using the language, it's very hard for the advocate to interrupt, and it may be hard to the arbitrator to interrupt, but I think with regard to that, we have come to the conclusion that there should be some means of stopping that kind of language, both as it develops in the hearing and then how we deal with it in the decision as well. So we're going to have continued discussions about that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I actually have another question. I think this one is for Mary Ellen. Lots of DEIB training is said to have no effect. How is what you're doing different? In other words, will arbitrators serving the parties actually be more aware and better to serve them?
Well, that is our hope. And I think probably a lot of us in this room have seen studies and reports about how diversity training doesn't work. But I think that's the diversity training model that is used in corporations and in big businesses. What we've been doing in our groups is a lot more personal. We have learning conversations. We challenge ourselves and we challenge each other about what's going on with us. We're starting with us. And it's very interesting. Well, I should say we started with doing a lot of research, listening to podcasts. There's this wonderful podcast, it's rather long, called Seeing White. If you're a white person, even if you're not a white person, it's a public television, public radio program. Reading articles, even the old-fashioned stuff, the Peggy McIntosh white privilege backpack. But then what we've been doing with each other is we have challenging what I call learning conversations. And the more we do this work, the more we have been willing to go into areas that are uncomfortable for us. Especially, I'll speak for myself, but I was raised in a household my parents were involved in the civil rights movement. I thought I was totally aware. And I've had to learn a lot, and I continue to learn a lot. One of my more embarrassing moments, which was maybe not noticeable to someone else, was walking into a hearing as the arbitrator, seeing a person of color. And in my experience, more often than not, the person of color was the grievant. I didn't address the person as the grievant, but within a minute, I realized that he was counsel for one of the parties. And that still bothers me. And that person is now a judge. That was what went on in my mind. And, I thought I was that good white person. So we have challenging conversations, and we hope that it is better than the diversity trainings we've read about in the reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. See, Alan has his hand raised, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to something that Mary Ellen said, and that, as arbitrators, we're in a very unique position because, we've been honored and trusted to sit in that chair at the end of the table. And that chair creates a lot of power. And we are being trusted to use our best judgment. So if people don't want to call it, well, we don't want to have diversity, equity, and training, well, let's call it just professional training. it is necessary for us to do our job well, because we have been asked to sit at that end of the table and issue decisions involving working people's lives.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
Alvin, if I might just interject for a moment. We are at 1 o'clock or a minute past, and the time flew by because we have so much information that we've shared. I want to ask the panelists if you'd be willing to stay with us for a few additional moments, if there are any further questions that Alvin's received from the audience, or if there are questions that any of you want to ask one another. I know Susan had her hand up.
Yeah, I'm here till about, I have to jump on another call at 1:30, so I'm good.
Okay.
I had my hand up, but I'd like to have someone else speak if they want to. So if there are other questions.
I don't have any other. Well, there was a question about a link to, hold on one second.
Yeah, the link that Alvin put up didn't work for me. Maybe Alvin, you have another one? Or repeat it?
Alan, you mean?
Oh, you're talking about the one I put in? Yeah, I accidentally put brackets around it. I'll put it in this time again without the brackets. Okay, so that should clear it up.
I think the only thing, if I may add, what I wanted to say is that I think people just must spend the time to make sure they understand that they have the biases that they have. And that takes time, energy, and reflection. And you can't do it by yourself. So you have to find others who are of like mind. I'm so happy to hear that the consortiums are moving forward, that Scheinman is picking up and adding areas, because I have so much respect for your educational institutions. And as an arbitrator, a long-term arbitrator, I have to say that I don't believe this sensitivity has existed in most of the years of my practice. And it's something that we not only need to do for our current members, but we need to do it for people coming into the profession, as well as people who are advocating for the clients. So thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions that folks have for the presenters? Mike, I'm not seeing anything.
You see one other hand from Pat McDermott?
Oh, I missed that one. Hi, Pat.
Hi,
Okay.
I have something to share that I don't have the answer, but I wonder. So we have this massive database, and what we did, and we've always done this, is we run our results against the charge basis, be it age discrimination, disability, race, et cetera, to see if there's different experiences from the parties. And we've never found a significant difference, which is interesting because as an academic, you would think if the arbitrators are observing and getting data about perceptions of bias, that somehow in this mediation data, where these are like massive questionnaires that go into a lot of different areas of procedural justice, do you get to tell your story? You've been treated fairly. We don't find it. And of course, we don't directly ask for it because that's not the nature of the study. But you would think it would somehow show in the data, but it doesn't. So just something to share. And I don't have the answer for that. Maybe you can juxtapose your results with what that database shows and try to figure out that question.
Oh, Susan's got her hand raised.
I'm sorry, but I have to respond to that. I think one of our experiences in asking people to be interviewed, both arbitrators and advocates, is there may be some hesitancy to speak out about what people believe may be discrimination in the way arbitrators run hearings and or in decisions, because people are concerned they're going to appear before us. And so there's some hesitation. So I'm not sure if that's part of that response.
Okay, there's more, let's see. Are there any other questions or comments? I don't know if I see everyone on my screen at the same time. There's too many people.
Well, I see no further hands raised.
Oh, Father Mark.
Oh, there we go.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm director of Labor Guild, and along with President Lisa Field and our good friend Rick Riley. I'm a priest with the Catholic educational congregation, and before doing some admin work here for the Labor Guild for the Boston Archdiocese, I was really supported and sustained by the Labor Guild over time. But for the sake of hopefulness, I just want to share the story of a father and son team in our organization. John E. Higgins Sr. was recognized by our organization, the Labor Guild, the Cushing Gavin Award in 1980. John was someone who went to work before finishing high school, became an arbitrator, recognized in the local area. And the next generation, his son, is an attorney with a 40-year career with an NLRB. He's now a senior faculty member of the Columbus School of Law, Catholic University. So from my perspective, we know these candidates are there, and overcoming these social obstacles and reservations. Nobody's going to say it's easy. If anyone tells you it's easy, it's not the case. So thank you for this presentation. Very helpful for me.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands. Am I missing anybody?
I think we've made it through all the Q&A. Well, I want to take a moment to say thank you to our first to our co-facilitators, Lisa and Alvin. Thank you both for giving your time and for helping to organize today's conversation. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the LERA National Office, Bernadette and Emily, for administering today's webinar, as they do for all of the chapters around the country. We want to give a big note of appreciation to both of them for the work. Thank you to all of our presenters today. Wonderfully informative and a lot of information crunched into a very short amount of time. Thank you so much for really taking an opportunity to talk to us about taking the theoretical and moving it into the practical. We were greatly appreciative of not only sharing your time, but the actual work that you're doing. And finally, to all of you that have attended, thank you for being with us today. If you're not a member of the chapter yet, you can go on over to lerachapter.org/Boston and join us. We're the best deal in town. We're moving to reinvigorate our event calendar over the year, and we are looking to get out a save the date shortly for an in-person event next month, hopefully with further details to follow very soon. With that, we will include all of the links that were spoken about today on the event website, and we'll also have this recording that will be uploaded to the website shortly as well. Thank you again for attending, and have a good day.
Thank you.